Hi everyone, Zach here, and welcome to lesson 36 in this series on developing a survival game. In this video, we'll create a material instance so that we can set up our landscape to look a little bit better, to make it more immersive, to hide some of our tiling. And to further hide our tiling, we'll add in some randomization to our material so that the pattern of the tiling is broken up a bit further. That said, this series has been brought to you by my Patreon sponsors, and all of that said, fire up your projects, and let's make a start. Alright, welcome back to the editor, everyone. And if you're not in your landscape materials test map, go over to it, and hopefully you'll have a setup similar to what I have, and everything is working fine. What we're going to do today is actually take care of the tiling a bit. We're going to do more with it in the next couple of videos, but for now, let's open up our landscape instance. Let's just move this to the side like we normally do, and again, I'm going to just fit it here. And I'm going to minimize everything except for our rock, because we're going to start with our rock. Alright. I'll leave world tiling open, but I don't think we're going to change world tiling. In fact, I know we're not, so I'm going to get rid of that as well. With rock, what we're going to do is start with our far tiling. So let's just go up to here, and let's just mess with the tiling. See what happens when we change the far tiling. So you can see if we make it really small, well, that's a little bit too small. Let's make it 0.01. We get that effect, and that's actually pretty close for the far to start. So near is being multiplied on top of that, so that's that there. And then when we get a little bit farther away, we have our far. So let's mess with our rock tiling in general and see what happens when we change that. So let's take our rock tiling here and just mess with this for a moment. You can kind of see, let me just slow the camera down a bit, where our near ends and our far begins. So I did that as purely as an example. I'm going to revert that back down to 0.01, and you can see there's our near versus far. So our near is pretty close to the camera, so we're going to have to adjust that as well. But let's just change our far. Let's go to 1.2. And while it's still tiled, you can see that line there, that's where it changes. It's a bit better. What we're going to do is change the fade length and fade offset a bit, though, probably to make this a bit better. So for our fade length, instead of 0.003, because it's really close to the camera, let's go to 1. Can't see much of a difference, can we? We really can't. Let's go to 10. You can see that's 10 unreal units. Let's go to 100. We can see it's getting a bit better. We still have that bit of a line there. A little bit harder to see. So let's go down to a flat surface for a moment. And you can see that transition period right there. All right, so we need to use really large numbers to get the effect we want here for a large landscape. So we're going to use the distance of 200. And there we go. That is 200 units around the camera. We'll have the near tiling. Now, of course, it's still faded out there a bit, so we're going to change the offset. And let's just change this to 200 as well and see what happens. You can see it's a bit different. Go to, say, 500. And you can see, hey, we have a little bit of a better look. And let's go down to a flat surface again. And you can still see there's that less than smooth transition. Now, there's a few ways we can handle that. We could go into our material and have a randomizer in the smoothing, so it's a little bit less obvious. Or we can go to a very large number like 2,000. And you can still see that line out there. And if you want to address that line, that's something we come back and do later on. We can add that randomizer to address the line. And that is something that we're not going to worry about right now. We'll take a look at the island to see what it looks like there. But that seems like a good setting for that. Now, our rock looks pretty plasticky, pretty wet. See, we have that nice little shine there. That's our specular. And if we go up, notice it gets worse. If we go down, it's a little too flat. We are a little too diffuse. So So we want a really small number. So something like 0.1. A little too small, actually. Let's go a little bit bigger. Let's go to 0.2. And you can see it looks a little bit wetter farther out. That's kind of nice, actually. We have to worry about that fade distance just a tiny bit, but we'll, again, take care of that more down the road. Let's go to 2.3. And that, to me, is a little too wet looking. So we want to go between 2.3 and between 0.03 and 0.02. So I'm going to do 0.025. We have a nice sort of specular surface there now. All right, our roughness max. We're not going to change our min. We will leave it at 0. Let's just take a look what happens when we lower our roughness, though. Let's lower it to 0. Let's raise it back to 1. You can see there's a bit of a change. I find personally for our rock that 0.75 offers that sort of nice, you know, kind of wet rock without it being too wet look. So our rough min stays the same. Everything else on that stays the same. So that adjusts our tiling slightly. It isn't perfect, don't get me wrong. We're going to do more for it in just a moment, but that gets us started. Next, let's look at the grass, because the grass just makes me cry when it looks like this. So we're going to go over to the grass. You can already see it's fairly tiled. And this is part of the reason why I don't like doing the grass as the two tiling method. It just is really complex, unfortunately. So for our grass tiling, let's select that. We're going to want to change this. Let's go up. Let's go to 0.1 and see what that looks like. Oh, that is so much worse. Let's go to let's go back to what we were at before, which I think is 0.01. Yep. Let's go to 0.001. Oh, that is not what I wanted. 0.001. Okay, that's a bit better, but it's a bit too big now. I don't like that look. Let's go to 0.02. Bit better. Let's go to 0.03. A little bit better again. Go to 0.04. And again, we can start seeing the tiling. So let's go back down to 0.03. Tiling is still a bit obvious in the distance, but less so up close. So I'm going to stay at 0.03 for now and use the landscape to mask the tiling and our normalizer outside of that. The grass is a bit shiny. So let's go to our specular max and let's lower our max to say 0.5. All right, it's a bit too dried out now. The leaves are not feeling right to me, so let's go to 0.75. And that is a subtle change, very, very subtle, but I think it works well. So we're gonna go to 0.75. Again, you can mess with the numbers till you find what you like. For our rough max, again, I think this is just a bit off. So if we go down to 0, it just, again, doesn't feel right. If we go to 0.5, it is a bit better. Go to 0.75. It's a little bit better again, but I want a little bit more of a subtle change. And I'm going to go to 0.85, and that fixes the distance on it a bit. Notice I'm angling at the sun so I can get that effect of the sunlight being reflected. Our min, we will leave at 0 for both of these. So that takes care of our grass for now. It's not perfect. Again, don't get me wrong. You can still see it's tiled, but yeah. Let's do our sand next, because the sand is the other one that's honestly my personal favorite to play with. But right now it looks like pudding, plastic, and some other stuff mixed together. It's a bit disturbing. Like, I want to paint it plastic disturbing, or stick a spoon in it and see if I can eat it. So take from that what you will. First, I want to fix the tiling on this because it's just too big. So this 0.001 is a bit wonky. I'm going to go to 0.2, and that's a bit better. Let's see if we can make it even better. Go to 0.3. Ooh, that is too much. And 2 is too little, so let's go to 2.5. That is better for the tiling. Still doesn't take care of the plasticiness of it. In fact, it makes the plasticiness stand out more. Probably why I started there, hint, hint. For our rough max, we will leave it at 1. For our rough minimum, however, this is the first time we're going to change one of the minins on roughness. Let's go up to 0.1. No, 0.2. Notice the distance. Look out here. 0.3. A little bit better. 0.4. Okay. 0.5. Yeah, no, I think it's between 0.4 and 0.3. Let's go back down to 0 so you can see the difference in the distance again. I'm going to do a very subtle shift to 0.35. So we have a little bit more shine out in the distance. It makes it a little bit nicer. And then for our specular, which is really where this gets all sorts of wonky. Well, so I took a moment to look around at my test file, and I'm just going to move it over here. It looks better over here, doesn't it? Away from the sunlight. Well, part of what's going to affect the sunlight will be our randomization on here, so we'll take care of the plasticiness in a couple of different ways. So we'll tackle the rest of the sand in a little bit. Let's do our dirt layer. Here's our dirt. Our dirt layer is actually pretty good to begin with, to be fair. I just want to really, I'm going to leave the tiling as is. The specular, I am going to actually change to 0.1. I'm just going to give you that number off the top of my head there. And for our rough max, it will leave at 1, our rough min at 0, so our dirt's done. And that leaves our mud. So our mud layer, now again, we have that very wet mud. It's kind of like that sort of wet mud look. If you want a wet mud look, hey, here we go. And because we're going to use this for our erosion layer on our map, maybe you do want that. But I'm going to change it a bit. I'm going to leave the tiling at 0.001. I'm going to do our max roughness. We're going to lower it just a little bit to 0.9, so it's a bit wetter out there, but not without it being plasticky wet. And our min, I'm actually going to not allow to go down to 0, because I do want it to be slightly varied. It's going to be 0.1 on that one. And for our specular, it's just way too specular. I'm going to have it go down to 0.1, and I kind of like that look a bit better. We have still a very wet mud look, but it isn't a very plasticky wet mud. And if we go over here, and this is how it's going to look on the map, it's a bit better. We still are going to improve this all in just a moment, and we're going to do that by just saving this for now. We'll close that, and we're going to go to our miscellaneous functions here. And in our miscellaneous functions, we're going to create a randomizer. So we're going to do a material function called MF Randomizer. Sorry for the British spelling there. And we're going to plug this into here. And the way this is going to work is we're going to take the same material 3 times and apply it onto every layer. So we're going to do a texture sample. And again, this will have to be from a wrapped space. We're going to search for macro variation, and we have T macro variation. Let's go find it. It should be in our starter content. It is, and we are going to move it from there to textures ground. So move and let it do everything it's doing. Go to our textures ground. There it's located, and boom, that's one of them. We need 3 of them. So it's the second one, and there's the third. We are going to alter these each slightly. So we're going to start with this top one. We're going to do a text chord. Actually, I probably could have, you know what? We're going to delete all 3 of these. We're going to just do this in one set of goes. We're going to do a multiply. On this multiply, we are going to come from that into our UV. We'll take care of what goes in here in just a moment. And then from our UV, we're going to do an add, or from our RGB, we'll do an add. Again, we'll take care of what we're adding in just a moment. And then finally, we're going to do a multiply. So this is a setup we're going to use for all 3 of these. Well, actually, the multiply isn't for all 3. But we're going to take all these nodes real quick. We're going to duplicate them once, just down here. And I'm going to just move this multiply ahead a bit, plug that into there. And I'm going to bring these all back slightly. There we go. And then I'm going to take all the nodes minus the first multiply, and I'm going to just line them up a bit better. All right, good enough for government work. And I'm going to duplicate these nodes down here. And this add is going to go into that multiply. So we're multiplying these textures together. Right now, if we plug this into there, because we're not doing anything different, we're just going to really intensify what we currently have. What we are going to do that changes them is we are going to set up our variations. So we're going to start from the bottom and work our way to the top. So we'll start with this one, which we will do a function input, and this function input will be a vector 2. and it will be called our UV variation 3. And I'm just gonna not worry about the name too much. I'm gonna set the values to 0.003 in the X and the Y. And I'm gonna plug that into there. And notice when we do that, hey, it zooms in a crap ton suddenly. Then I'm gonna do another function input over here. And this will be a scalar. And this will be our variant const 3. And for this one, I'm just going to use the value of 0.5. And that goes into our add there. And then another function input. And this will be of vector 2. And it's our UV variation 2. And for this one, I'm going to use the default values of 0.05 by 0.05. That goes into our B there. And again, notice that it's zoomed in a bit more as compared to that one, but not as much as compared to that one. And again, I'm going to do a function input, and this will be a scalar, and it will be our variant constant 2. And I'm going to plug the B into there, and this value I'm going to default out to also 0.5. So they're all going to be 0.5, by the way, in this case. So 0.5. And then finally, function input, and this will be vector 2, of course. It will be our UV variation 1. And for this one, I am going to put the values at 0.2 by 0.2. Notice that on the variations, I tend to have been constant on the two values. I don't vary them, otherwise it gets a weird stretching effect. And one more function input of scalar type. And this will be our variation, or did I call it variation then variant? No, I called it variant constant. I meant to call it variation constant, but we'll do variant, I guess. Variant constant 1. And again, this one will be 0.5, just like all the rest. And if we look at what this is doing, if we open up our adds here, we can see that it's intensifying the white areas and making a little bit of changes across them. All right, that takes us through setting up the variations. Now we need to apply this in each of our layers. I'll show you how to set it up for each layer, and then you will have to do it for one layer, then you should do it for the rest. So I'm going to go to my materials, ground, landscape, and I'm going to open up my rock layer. In my rock layer, what I'm going to do is I am going to grab this, break the base color, and put a multiply node in. I'm going to leave the A as our diffuses coming in, plug that into our base color there, and then I'm going to do a function call, and I'm going to search for our randomizer. All right, and the result goes into B. We'll get errors right away. Oh, we didn't get the errors right away. Cool. I think if we try to apply it, we'll get errors right away. So I'm going to start promoting these two variables. Oh, it didn't work the way I thought it would. So I did it backwards. I thought I can get them to show up in a consistent order. I guess not. So promote to parameter. This will be our rock constant 3. And this will go into our rock folder. And I'm going to just leave the default value of 0.5 for all of these, by the way. So UV variation, promote to parameter. This will be our rock UV variation 2. And again, our variation 2 was, I'm going to set to 0.2 by 0.2. All right. And we get that weird little color. We don't need to actually see the color for this one. Let's do our next one, which will be our const 2, which again will be 0.5. Because we're just going to be consistent with our constants for right now. So 0.5, oops, 0.5. And then our UV variation 1. Again, which will be rock. I need to go back and put these all into the correct category. So before I forget to do that, this is rock. This is also rock. This variant will set to, oh, this one is going to be 0.2. This is supposed to be variant 02. Sorry about this. It's supposed to be 0.05, 0.05. This one is supposed to be 0.2 by 0.2. All right. Again, we don't need to see the color. It doesn't really matter. And then we're going to do our variant constant 1. And again, going to label this as rock. I'm going to put this in the rock category before I forget. And again, it is 0.5. And finally, our last parameter, which is our UV variation 3. Rock is going to be 0.003. So 0.003 by 0.003. Put it in the rock category. And I'm going to go back in here, and I missed one. Rock variation U1 is not in the correct category. There we are. It is now. I'm going to save and then apply, or apply then save. I hit save first apparently, which does apply it. It's going to compile all the shaders. While this is going on, go ahead and replicate this in the rest of our materials. Alrighty, and I'm just finishing up the last one right now. And I'm just going to double check that I have set them all to the correct settings. They all say sand at the start, and they're all under a sand thing. Same with the mud. Same with the grass, which I checked. I just switched it back. Same with our dirt. And if you want to take a preview what this looks like, well, we can hit this multiply node here real quick. And if we zoom in, you can see the noise that we've added to our material. Notice the noise is fairly stationary though, which is kind of what we want. And we're going to let the shaders compile, but if we go back to our map and just wait here for a moment, I'm going to pause while we wait, we'll see the effect. All right, if you've had your shaders compile, you should notice there's now a bit of a difference on the texture. You can see there's some variation. Now it's a little bit easier to see. You can see the line still when we look farther away. And that's going to break up or distract our eyes from the tiling. Yeah, sure, there's still tiling out there, and oh, that is much more specular than it should look, but it's fine. It's dirt. It's meant to be a bit weird. The same for our mud. It's a little bit better to see on that part right there. Our grass, still very clearly tiled if you know what you're looking for, but it is suddenly much harder to see unless you're intentionally looking for it, because our eyes are distracted by the patterning and coloring. I'm just going to double check the sand layer. The sand does not seem to be doing much of anything. Should be. The sand's actually where I expect to see a lot of this come into play. Again, one of my personal favorites in the sand. So I'm just going to save the sand layer and make sure it applies correctly. I'm just going to let it recompile the shaders, and I'll be back with you in just one moment. Alright, my shaders are still recompiling, but I can see the effect right over there. So I wasn't seeing that earlier. Maybe it was there, maybe I just wasn't seeing it, but hey ho. There we are. There's the effect that I'm looking for that's going to help break up our sand a bit. Now again, we're going to go back to our material instance, and we're going to make some changes here. So I'm just going to save everything real quick, drag this to the side, and just set it up so that I can more easily make these changes. All right, I am going to, in my material instance, I'm going to start with my rock again, just because, yeah, it's what I like starting with, okay? Sue me. So we might not make any changes here, actually. I'm just going to double check we have everything we want. So for our rock, we're going to leave our variance at 0.5, and we're going to not change our UV. So if I zoom out, all of these say the same for our rock. That's fine. Let's go to our grass next. Again, I don't remember what changes I've made, so we're doing this together. And that's actually all going to stay the same. Do I change any of these, actually? I know I do. The mud is the one I changed. So let's go to mud. Sorry, I knew there was one I did some changes on. I love how they show up in different orders in the mud. Cool. So for the mud, we are going to change the UVs on all of these, I believe. So for variant 1, we will, let's pop over variant 1. We will go to 0.5 by 0.5. I'm just going to zoom out a bit so we can see the mud a bit more clearly. For variant 2, which is right there, I am going to change this to 0.4 by 0.4. And I'm going to just very quickly turn off game settings so we can, oh, no, we'll turn game settings back on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to settings real quick, go to scalability, and find post-processing and turn that to low. That's a bit better. And that's closer to what I want to see. And now I'm going to take our third variant here. And for our third variant or variation, I am going to set it to 0.01. So 0.01. I'm looking at the wrong thing, which is why I can't see the difference. There we are. I'm looking at the dirt, not the mud. And you can see that stretching I mentioned earlier. If I set it to 0.01, there we go. We get a little bit of a different look. And I think the better one to see it on is still this. It's a little bit more broken up, and it doesn't look as patterned as it does with everything else. Again, you can see the fade distance thing there. Would it be helpful, I guess, if I was looking at the right thing, wouldn't it? Sand is one of the other ones that we are going to actually vary a bit. Our dirt, I actually don't vary. So I'm not sure I looked at that. Our sand, we're going to change a bit more. Like I said, we're going to use the changes to switch it up a bit. We're only going to change 1 and 2, though. So for 1, what we're going to do is we are going to move our settings to 0.5 by 0.5. And for sand 2, we are going to change this to 0.3 by 0.3. And it just gives us a nicer look. Not sure why it's still looking a bit specular compared to my test file, but I'm wondering if it has to do with the tessellation, which we'll be taking care of. Mostly because in the last version of this, I did all this after the tessellation stuff, but it made it really hard to see how various pieces were affecting each other. So we'll double check our numbers in the next video. For now, I'm going to start closing things out. Hopefully it won't ask me to save stuff. Of course it will. But that takes us through what we need to do for this video. I'm just going to keep closing this out and saving. Once the shader is compiled, I'll do my outro. So if you want to head off before I say my usual stuff, feel free to do so. I'm going to save that as well and close that out. All right, my shaders are compiled. I did move the camera slightly. So all of our work, we now have our materials mostly set up. We have tessellation left to do. This video and this series have been brought to you by Patreon sponsors like Galois, 1Vol10, Quad Benson, Hanas, Connor, and Rian. If you've enjoyed working on your landscape, go ahead and hit that like button down below. It really does help me and this channel out. And if you want to be here when we work on our tessellation and finish up setting this up before we import our island, make sure to hit that subscribe and notify icon. All of that said, I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.